we saw that when we attempted to do our command injection through the proxy, it required a little bit of guesswork. It required a little bit of knowledge on our part to understand what sort of output we're looking for, what sort of inputs we might want to try, that sort of idea, right? So we want to be able to automate that process a little bit. We don't want to be the ones really guessing these inputs every single time. The repeater works very well if we want to determine, a general idea of what sort of inputs might work, what sort of inputs might not, what sort of responses we expect to see from the server itself. But in general, if we understand what sort of vulnerability we're looking for, we can utilize some other tools inside of Burp to be able to automate the process of finding the actual exploits. Because in general, really what we're using the proxy and the repeater for is understanding, okay, this looks like it could be a command injection, or this looks like it could be a SQL injection, and then we want to be able to leverage that as well as other tools inside of Burp to actually get a working exploit. And the way that we're going to do this is utilizing the Intruder Tool inside of Burp, which will allow us to actually take a request and inject different inputs into it until we get a working vulnerability. So let me give you an example of how we can do this with the same thing that we looked at, which is the command injection. To start, I'm going to turn my intercept on. I'm going to put in a working IP address, and I'm going to submit that. This gives us the request for that command execution. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to say send to intruder. What this will do is it will give me an intruder setup that is going to send this request in. If I go to positions, it's going to show me which different values are actually going to be attempted to be injected with. Anything that's highlighted in green with these fancy little S characters in them is a character that we can try to inject values into. It's ones that are automatically identified by Burp as potentially vulnerable. Now, in general, I don't really want to vary the PHP session, so I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to click on clear, and that will make it static rather than changing. Same idea with the security. I don't want that to change at all. And for that matter, I don't want submit to change at all. What I really want to do is I want to try to inject data into the IP field, which is why that one is the only one that's highlighted in green. So this tells Burp, send this request, and we're going to replace this IP with things that I specify from the payloads, which is located here. Now at the payloads option, we have a few different ideas of things that we can do. The most common thing that we're going to be doing here is using a simple list to determine what inputs could potentially be vulnerable. Now, we can get lists from pretty much anywhere. I know that this is going to potentially be a command injection and that it's a Windows server. So in general, I went on to GitHub and I found this nice project that has command injection payload lists. So with this, I can take a look and I can even grab like all of the Unix ones. I can grab all of the Windows ones and just try them all and see what generally works and what generally doesn't. But since I know it's going to be Windows, I'm just going to grab a couple of the Windows commands and give you an idea of what that looks like. So let's grab some of these. We know that the dir commands worked before, so we'll give those a try and just see what happens. So I'm going to copy them from here. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to press paste. You'll see that this pastes all the payloads into the list here. Once we've done this, we can go back to positions, and then I can just click Start Attack. Now, if you're on the Community Edition, you'll get this pop-up that it's a demo version of the Burp Intruder. In general, you'll be able to do most of the things you want to be able to do in the Community version. There are some things that are locked up on it, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same functionality. So we can just click OK here. And you'll see it will start to try each of the different commands that we specified, right? So let's try out all the different payloads that we have, and it will attempt to determine what the responses for them are. So as you can see, it just tells us the length of each of the responses. It does one that doesn't have a payload to give us sort of like a base point to start with. So this shows us generally what a response will look like if we don't change anything. And what we want to do is we want to look for variations in the length. For instance, this one is shorter, which tells me that something happened. In this case, it says the ping request could not be completed because it couldn't find the host name dir. So that's great. This one is also longer. And you can see that this one actually outputted the contents of the directory, which tells me that this worked, right? So you can see that in general, this is a really great way to be able to determine, whether a command injection is actually possible on this input. Now, in general, just like with the repeater, you can actually see each of the responses, like in the raw, you can see the render of it, you can see the headers of it, you can actually see the general request that we sent. So you can see every single piece through here the same way that you would be able to see it through the repeater. For that matter, you can even send this request to the repeater afterwards to further attempt to do things with it, right? So it's a very nice way to be able to try to manipulate data inside of Burp. So if we find something that we think could be vulnerable, we could throw a whole bunch of word list attack types at it and see if something happens to work. Now, of course, if you are attacking a server that you do not own, this is a very loud attack, right? You're going to see all these different requests. They're obviously malicious attacks. This is a very clearly obvious attempt at attacking a server. But if you own the server and you're doing a pen test for yourself, this is a great method to do because you can just build up a huge word list and just shoot them all at the application and see if anything breaks it. For that matter, one other thing that's really great that you can do here is if you ever were reported a vulnerability, you can add that vulnerable input into the word list as well as variants of it. And then each time that you build your application again, you can run that word list against it to make sure that you didn't reintroduce the vulnerability in any sort of changes that you made. So this is a great thing from a security perspective because it allows you to automate the testing of vulnerable inputs for different sections of your web application. So in general, this is the Intruder is a really good tool to be able to use to help automate the tasks that we were doing with the proxy and the repeater. So with the proxy, we can capture the command. With the repeater, we can try different inputs to see generally what sort of input-output things are happening and what potentially could be happening in terms of like what kind of vulnerabilities might exist. And then we can send it to the Intruder and fire a huge word list at it and determine what vulnerabilities actually do exist inside of it. So generally, this is a pretty good flow that you can use with Burp to be able to find vulnerabilities in web applications.